welcome to this preview of ABA Inside Track's Winter 2024 Book Club. For those of you new to the podcast, this is a bonus episode to all y'all. Every season, we do a book club for our Patreon supporters. That's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. For folks who subscribe at the $10 and up level, they're able to get a full 2-hour discussion of a book club voted on by them. And we discuss it with our book club buddy, Alan Haberman. And they're able to get 2 CEs for free for listening. So this is just a little preview of the book. And the book this winter is Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for Behavior Analysts by Dixon, Hayes, and Belisle. It's a pretty recent book. So if you're interested in just kind of getting a sense of what our book clubs typically sound like, we're going to give you a little preview, gives you the beginning of the show where we sort of talk about our general impressions of the books and some overviews. And then if you'd like to, feel free to jump over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track to subscribe. And you'll be able to get the full audio right now, as well as 2 CEs. That also comes with access to voting on our listener choice episodes. We do one of those every season. Our book club episodes we do every season. And then CEs for all of those episodes for free. So you get like 12, right? 12 per year just for subscribing. And you get all of our regular episodes a week ahead of time. So again, if you're interested, that would be awesome. We'd really appreciate your support there. Otherwise, we usually release these about a year afterward. So if you can be patient, it will come out eventually. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this preview of our discussion. Here it is. Hey, everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always for this 2024 Winter Book Club are...
me, your lovable friend, Jackie.
And me, your lovable wife, Diana.
And me, your, friendly book club guy, Alan.
You're also lovable.
Also very lovable.
I would say, Alan, you are lovable.
Thank you.
I love you.
Well,
I love me too.
I love that. Got all awkward there. Diana's kids, when I'd say I love them to them, they would go, "Thank you."
Yeah, we don't.
No, they love you.
We don't show
Jackie.
Emotion in our house.
They
no,
love
now
you.
they do. But when they were little, they'd be like, "Thank you." It was the best.
Oh. Well, welcome to the show, everybody. This is our podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research. And once per season, if you're listening to this in 2024, thank you. It means you are a patron and you are able to listen to this right as it comes out. We do these long form book club episodes as voted on by patrons. If you're hearing this in the far distant future, hello from the past.
Yeah, hope everything worked out okay.
Yeah, we hope things are good. You know, you're getting to hear more about this book that you didn't choose, but you get to hear about it. So here we go. We're going to talk all about a book this season and year. This season and year, the topic was acceptance and commitment therapy related books. So we had a couple different choices. We had The Happiness Trap, which is destined to never win a poll. So I don't know if it'll ever get back in now that we've done this. We had a book on ACT for Parents, and we had the winner of the book club, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for Behavior Analysts, a practice guide from theory to treatment by Dixon, Hayes, and Belisle, which had only just came out in March of 2023. So it is not even a year old at the time of this recording. So this is a relatively new book, and that was the winner, and that's what we'll be talking about over the next close to 2 hours or so, because we do a little long form on these book club shows. So why don't we get right into the thick of it? Folks, why don't we start really quickly around the horn? What is everyone's sort of current status with acceptance and commitment therapy? We've talked about it a little bit on the show. We've done some episodes on it. And I think we all are coming at this book from some of us from closer perspective, but we're all kind of starting this book as a very different audience members. Each of us kind of a slightly different audience member. Alan, why don't you start us off? Sort of where are you in your ACT journey up the mountain, as the metaphor is?
Well, as a practitioner, I have access to the AIM curriculum and several other sort of tools that incorporate ACT. I've done some, CEUs involving ACT, especially for like parents. That's where I find I use it most, of like trying to use that like values and commitment based language to help parents in terms of identifying treatment goals and things like that. But I personally have used it in my own therapy journey for 6 or 7 years now, like for quite a while, starting with the happiness trap and moving on. So, I feel a comfortable novice. I put it that way. I have a long way to go, but I'm not a complete newbie.
Okay. Jackie, how about you?
I have taken some classes in relational frame theory. I have gone to workshops with Dr. Steve Hayes. I did an ACT boot camp. And I am on the fence on whether we as behavior analysts should be using ACT in our practice. I see some benefits. And I see some things that make me a little nervous. That's kind of where I am.
All right, Diana.
I probably know the least about ACT of the people in this group. And I read this book, I guess, as someone who really doesn't have a lot of background other than basically what we've done in preparation for previous podcast episodes. So that was my perspective coming in.
Okay. And
you?
As for me, I think I've read more ACT and heard a little, heard some kind of professional development talks on the subject. So certainly I've read ACT Made Simple by Russ Harris. I've purchased a couple other ACT books that I was like, I'm going to read these books, and I have yet to do so.
That counts, right?
I did finally read The Happiness Trap because I realized it's never going to be probably a book club choice again. Maybe. But I think now that we've done this book, it's kind of going to be off the table. So I said I should just read this book. So I did finally read The Happiness Trap, not exactly in preparation for the show. Similar to Alan, I've had some times in my life where I have found therapy to be very helpful. And the last 2 times, I think I really was going through some challenges. I said, I'm going to actually try ACT because I'd already read ACT Made Simple, and I did the thing that the book, this and The Happiness Trap tells you, which is try these out, do these. And I said, no, I'm just reading this book until the end. I'm sure I'll use this someday. And I decided that someday was then. So I specifically looked for ACT practitioners, and I found it to be very helpful. I have a couple strategies and kind of metaphors and sort of ways that I continue to use, really kind of relating more towards, I think, my own acceptance and my own kind of presence or mindfulness component, whichever phrase. I think they change the phrase in the hexaflex every now and again. I've done some PD, some really a long one with Evelyn Gould and Juliet Sandoz. They had like a multi-part series over the pandemic that I got into and realized that they were talking at such a high level. So I was really playing a lot of catch up. It was amazing, but I was just so behind. So I had to really catch up a lot. And then certainly I've seen Mark Dixon talk twice this past. In the last 6 months, he was spoke at Stone Soup. I thought he did a really nice talk looking at, I think, the peak curriculum, sort of some of the modifications that he and his group had made for using peak for younger children or for individuals with moderate disabilities. And I found that to be very interesting. So that's about as much as I know about relational frame theory. And then he also spoke at Babbitt earlier this year as well. Earlier last year in 2023. So I think I am not as versed in it as Alan, or possibly even as versed in it as you, Jackie, because it sounds like you've done a lot more directed professional development. However, I think I'm more on the side of the fence of I do find value in ACT, and I think this book does make some statements related to how the average BCBA might also find ACT useful in their practice. Whether or not everyone's going to agree with that, I'm not sure. But I certainly did come into this book and read this book with some knowledge and with an interest in using more ACT, specifically because most of my clients these days do have complex verbal repertoires. They can use metaphor. So some of these procedures and some of the framework, I guess, of ACT may be helpful for them, I think. Not that I can do it because I don't have a supervisor, but have been actively looking for one in the past few months. to see about maybe using some more of it in my own practice. So that's where we all are. I think this is the part where we kind of do some initial thoughts on the book itself before we do a deeper dive into it in a little bit. I'll start off here if y'all don't mind.
Go ahead.
I struggled with this book. I struggled in a lot of ways with this book, both in terms of some of the content being very much, I think, over the head of someone who picks this up saying, ooh, a guidebook. Frankly, if I read something that's called a guidebook, I expect it to guide me. And when I find myself ending the first chapter saying, there's no way in hell I'm going to read this whole book, there's no way we can talk about this book on our podcast and sound even remotely intelligent, because it did not do anything to pull me in. And it used so many terms that just did not feel fair for something called a guidebook. In chapter 1, I was feeling very frustrated. As the book went on, it was really a lot of ebbs and flows. There were sections of the book that I thought were great in terms of if you have a basic understanding of some of the ACT principles, certainly the hexaflex, this did a really nice job bringing behavioral science to those terms. However, I also felt that much of this book was written for someone who was kind of where, like, you know, Jackie and Alan and I are in our journey of, like, we kind of got a sense of what ACT is overall. We're in different parts of our journeys with it, but we kind of get it. So I felt that was really interesting to see the behavioral science come in. If I'd never read an ACT book and I picked this up because it said it was a guidebook and therefore probably will help me as a practitioner, I don't know how I could have made it through this book. And I don't know if it would have given me anything I could use day to day. Maybe, you know, everyone's acceptance of this book will be the same. But I really did spend a lot of time reading this book, sometimes just saying, this is great, I love it, it's what I want. But a lot of times really getting fused with the thought, I don't think I will ever be able to do this. And I think I want to go back to working with clients who don't have complex verbal repertoires, and contingency management is all I need to be thinking about because this stuff seems impossible. I also found the book to be in real need of, I think it needed some more shaping. I think it, not underbaked in the sense of the ideas being poor, because clearly we have 3 authors who know their stuff. And at various times it's shown through so much how ACT worked, in terms of human behavior. But then there'd just be chapters that felt very out of place for this book. They didn't match with what the rest of it was. I really left the whole thing saying, if they'd cut out 30% and then really polished the 70% that was left, this really could have been something that I think blew some minds in like really exciting ways. But as it was, I was just sort of left hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. And the whole experience left me feeling very frustrated. I did then, however, continue and say, you know what, I am going to learn more. So I did leave this book feeling more interested in learning about ACT. So it didn't, poison me to the whole thing. And I did use some of the metaphors. Now, I've also read The Happiness Trap since I read this book, so it's not all going to be this book. Some of it's Happiness Trap. But I did use some of the terminology in these books the other day when my son was feeling down. I was trying to get him up to go to do some activities. And he later, unprompted by me, told Diana that Dad gave a really good pep talk this morning. It's about a 7. So, and talked and
7 out of 10.
It was 7 out of 10. He didn't say what it was out of.
7 out of 10.
So I definitely learned a lot. But yeah, I think as a book, I'm a bit mixed overall. But that's where I kind of am in the general sense.
I think the feat that they tried to do is really difficult, right? To try to combine the entire relational frame theory book in a few chapters to then apply how ACT relates to relational frame theory is very difficult to do in a few chapters, right? Because, like they said a ton in the book, right, that there are a lot of new terms that if you're a behavior analyst and you haven't looked at RFT yet, that those new terms are going, they're going to describe something that we haven't yet described yet. And so they're going to need definitions. They're going to need explanations. They're going to need examples. And so I think, Rob, that is where you might have had a hard time, right? Because the first couple of chapters are all like, let's talk broadly yet specifically about RFT and ACT in this small window where you might need more, right? And I think they did a really great job defining all the terms. I think these chapters actually do a better job of the definition than other ACT and RFT books that I've read by these authors. I think they did a good job being concise in a way that is hard when you're talking about a really big subject. And so I think for those chapters, I thought that was nice, and it served as a good review for me. The one thing I felt a little bit in the first part of the book was they were trying to argue against people like me that are reading it that are a little more skeptical. So I felt a little bit like they're like,
Jackie, they were 100%. Like
right?
when we get to, hopefully I'll have time to get to the ethics chapter. There is no way to read that chapter without the sense of like, and if you think ACT is stupid and not behavior analytic, you're a fossil.
Right. And I actually don't think ACT's stupid. And I think a lot of it is behavior analytic.
Because you'd be a fossil according to this book.
I think a lot of it is behavior analytic. And for me, I just get concerned and they rightly so said in the first 2 chapters, right, that they are also concerned as well, that you can't just read a book and do ACT, right? And so having a guidebook is great, but you can't just read this book and then be an ACT practitioner, right? Yeah. And that is, I think, the slippery slope with behavior analysis and ACT is we don't right now have like now look, I am a BCBA and I have a specialty that is certified through an outside body that is not, right, the ACT bootcamp people, that is verified by like ABAI or verified by the BACB that says now I can practice this. And I think that is what concerns me because it is very different, right? There are pieces that are outside the scope of behavior analysis, right? For all intents and purposes for graduate school, right? Like in graduate school, you don't necessarily learn about psychological disorders. You don't really necessarily learn about depression, anxiety, and what can happen and, those types of things. And then if as a behavior analyst, you are now expecting yourself to treat those, that's the part that makes me uncomfortable, right? And so I felt like in the first couple of chapters, because I still am on the fence, right? I'm not like 100% no, but I'm not 100% yes either. I'm still walking the fence there. There's just so many terms too. That's another thing. Like there's so many new terms. Is that parsimonious? I'm not sure. Do we need all of those terms? I'm not sure there either. And so these are my thoughts about RFT and ACT, but I did feel like, hey, you're writing these chapters for me, and there's even sentences for me. Like, I know you don't think that RFT is behavior analytic, but here's why. And so I thought that part struck a chord with me when I'm reading it. That I was like, oh, you're writing this for the person that might be skeptical, but shouldn't you be writing it for the person that is not skeptical, that is all in? Because that's the person that's buying the book, presumably, right? Not me, if I wasn't in this book club.
Yeah. Alan, I know you were the person. I feel like we're saying it like Blake. You were the one who wanted this in the poll. You brought this to our attention as a possible option.
I wanted to do Joy of Parenting.
We always want to we'll do a parenting one someday.
Well, I will accept that blame. No, even just hearing you talk, it's sort of shifting my perspective on the book. I realize I sort of developed this metaphor just now that so often when we read a book, we think of it almost like a new computer peripheral, like something we plug and play, we understand the basics, and we're ready to go. Acceptance and commitment therapy and RFT are more like a hardware upgrade, like installing your own RAM or installing a video graphic card. It is not something that you can do casually. It's not something you can do casually as a behavior analyst to the computer of being a BCBA, as it were. And so I think this book is is dense, but I think it's important that they take it seriously, and they take seriously the thought that this is not something you can casually pick up and start using. This is something that represents a lot of skills that you need to have and understand. And so if you pick this book up and find it a little hard to access, it means you just need to be very careful in how you use ACT in your practice, and to just make sure that you don't, because it's just a big shift for us as a field into sort of what we're talking about, a shift that we probably need to be taking very seriously, because we're getting into other people's scope of practice quite seriously. Yeah. But and I think a lot of what Jackie was saying about, like, this is a little bit beyond what we learn about as behavior analysts. I think also because if you look into the history of like RFT and the work like Sidman did, that's like behavioral statistics, which is a step beyond like radical behaviorism. It's a little different. It's information science and behaviorism and some things like that. So I think that's also why it can be kind of inaccessible at times. So my impression of the book is it communicates very seriously why acceptance and commitment therapy is important to our field, but also why you have to be very careful how you move forward in its use in your practice. It's not just the hexaflex.
Right. One thing I would recommend is increasing the font for us oldies out there. Woo! The font is, I can't even tell you, maybe 8. The size.
Pretty small.
It's like 8.
Yeah.
And it's like Times New Roman 8. And so a lot of the times I'm like, eyeballs big, book away from my face, because now I'm in my 40s, so I'm an old lady with reading. And I was like, oh, usually you're like, oh, one chapter, it's only like 20 pages long, and it'll take me like, like an hour. And you're like 3 hours later, because it's actually disguised as like a 3 times chapter because the size is so small.
Yeah, there were definitely some topographical problems with the book. I think the small font size. There's something about it that just felt like this definitely seems like if Dixon and Hazelblatt kind of got together in a couple months, or you're kind of thinking about the book and they're like, what do we want for second edition? Like, what would we update? I think there really is a way to make this kind of hum a little more. Alan, I think you mentioned kind of before we started recording, we were talking about the audience. Like, who is the audience for this book? Which, it's one of those weird conversations, because usually we talk about science books, like, who's the audience? But we've done a lot of books on the book club that are sort of, the audience is everybody. So, but I would say here, you'd think, well, the audience is behavior analysts. But I don't think the audience is necessarily every behavior analyst, because I don't think every behavior analyst would be able to get through this book and feel that they were going to gain anything, just because there's so much, I think, background knowledge you need to bring to the book to make some of the chapters, I think, that are the best have a value. It doesn't really help me as someone new to ACT if someone is telling me the behavioral scientific underpinnings of the hexaflex, if I don't really understand fully what the hexaflex is. And I don't think this book does a bad job describing it in behavioral terms, but I don't think if I had sort of a ACT Made Simple knowledge of sort of what these terms sort of meant to me as just a human being rather than a professional, it would just be like, this is more vocabulary. These are more words. This is just, it is way too much. And then at the end of it, it's not even like you can read this book and now you're ready to act. Because at the end, it's like, and now you are ready to explain how ACT works in behavioral terms. But if you're not a practitioner because you have a supervisor, you still need all that. So you're not ready to do much other than maybe talk more intelligently about ACT.
Well, maybe that's the purpose. Maybe the purpose was to get people excited about ACT and having it in one
practice
place.
Guide from theory to treatment. If it had been called a practice guide to theory and better understanding, yes, 100%.
But I mean, to be fair, to be fair, if anyone watches Letterkenny, to be fair, you did use some of the exercises in the treatment part. Right?
I actually used some. I
Yeah,
liked
you
some of the
did,
questionnaires that were
right?
shared. I actually
So-
looked at a few of them, and I had a couple times I thought these will be helpful to gather some information.
Right. So
Uh,
I'm wondering if maybe this would have been better suited as a two-parter. Like a two-parter
yes,
book,
this
right?
100%.
Two-parter book where you have the theory book and then you have the treatment book, and you can buy them as a set.
In a really nice slipcase.
Yeah, right? But
well,
then
does
it defeat the purpose? Yes, probably.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think the other thing is that you can, if you've read and reread and internalized this book, because it is, again, very much a theory incorporating new terms, changing your own relational frames in terms of some of this stuff, as I cheekily grin, it will make, as you approach treatment and do CEUs and look at curricula, I think the idea would be is that it makes those treatment tools more valuable to you as a practitioner, because you would be able to build and change and see the intent rather than sort of relying on what's there and being hesitant to change things because you're like, I don't know why this is the way that this is, and so I better not change anything, which I think sometimes happens.
Yeah. So maybe it should have been called like upping your ACT game, like how to go from like mediocre ACT practitioner to a superstar, or something, because it definitely read like when I learn a new skill, at some point I've read all the basic skills and you keep reading the same thing over and over. And then you find that work that's like, oh, this is the why. And I feel like this book is the why of ACT in a way. I know there's other books that are too, but this was probably, I mean, I haven't read every ACT book. I've bought a lot of them. But this felt very much like a why of like so now that you know the basics, here's how to understand it even better so that you can be an even stronger practitioner.
Yeah.
And
okay.
But if I came in, I mean, again, if I see practice guide, I'm assuming something, as it's like there's a contract between me and the author, and I'm assuming that this will take my hand and walk me through the process. And this book does not do that in the way I wanted it to.
Okay, but it's like that's like the secondary title. And
but the first one's even worse though, Alan, because it implies everyone.
Impression.
Of course you can.
So I just working on the first half of the title, which is Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for Behavior Analysts. I, as maybe the person with the least experience in this area, found this book almost impenetrable. And Alan, I had my own metaphor that I think kind of like sidles up next to your metaphor of your like CPU. But mine was, I felt like this book was like a puzzle box, right? That I could not figure out how to open, even using all of my behavior analytic keys and knowledge. And what's more, I don't know that I did not get the feeling that the authors wanted me to get the box open. Even as a doctoral level BCBA with a lot of knowledge in this area, I felt like I was missing some really key introductory way to open up this puzzle box of a book.
Can I have a metaphor? It's not a metaphor. I have an illusion. Can I make an illusion?
Oh, yeah.
Can I use my illusion?
I don't know.
There's an old episode of The Simpsons where Homer, their house is sinking. And so Homer isn't going to pay to get the foundation repaired. So he gets a video by Troy McClure. And it's like, hi, this is your guide to foundation repair. And the joke of it is immediately upon watching it, it's like, this is going to be your, how-to step-by-step dummies guide to this. And it's like, first, you're going to need like a stucco lathe. If you don't have a stucco lathe, get it. And it's just like immediately like, here are terms you don't understand in the first 5 seconds. And I was thinking of that joke from The Simpsons very much at various points, not throughout the entire book, because there were definitely sections that I think just having an understanding of behavior analysis is going to go a lot farther. But it definitely had this sense of, oh, didn't you know? You have to know a lot of information before you read this book and get a lot out of it. And I didn't feel I had a warning again, up your ACT game, right? Like that I would have understood, I better know a little bit more about ACT before I read this book. This is like this is like my next level of the journey. And I kind of wish that had been clearer in the title. I think the title just feels very like, this is a book that is for everybody and it will help you and you will learn your things. And I don't think this book is for everybody.
Like we got warp zone to World 4.
I think there was some chapters that were for everybody. Not every
chapter.
There
were some chapters that I was able to get into. And I think the ones in which they like break things down and apply behavior analytic principles to
so
the whole thing.
Those are fascinating.
Really good,
I really love those chapters.
And I liked those.
There was some chapters I think that were for everybody. Some chapters were a little more dense and more murky, I think. But we shouldn't say as a whole. It, like Rob said, I think it's uppy, downy.
There was that. Oh, go ahead, Alan.
Well, I was just going to say, just since Diane, your experience, since you just have the least experience with sort of the RFT and all that, let's say that you sort of use this book, you read it, and you self-assess. Like, this is the stuff I didn't understand. I'm going to go try to understand that better, come back. Could you use this book in sort of a conversation with yourself to like, you know what? Like, I feel like I'm really confident with ACT now because I've got like one book that shows me not only what I know, but what I don't know and feel I should know, and then come back and change your practice like through not immediately. It might take you years to do that. But if you really wanted to incorporate ACT into practice, do you feel like that book might be more useful then?
I liked the middle of the book. I will say that, right? And that's
same. The middle of the book was great.
Yeah.
Middle of the book was really good.
I guess we'll get to it, hopefully. So that part, I guess, was the part that I was most able to grab something from. I don't hate ACT or the idea of ACT, right? I think there's a lot of good stuff here and a lot of questions within behavior analysis that we don't address generally due to the limitations of our science. So it's attempting to answer those important questions, right? And you're going to get into murky territory in doing so. So I totally get that. Like, I'm on board with all of that, right? I don't feel at all prepared to now teach ACT or do ACT based on this book, but I'm not completely turned off to the idea of it. I might seek out another book that might help me better.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just my question. Was like, do you feel that this gives you clear information to go follow up on, to be like, well, I didn't really understand this part, so let me go look up these terms and like figure out what they're talking about here. Because I think
maybe.
There was also a part of it, and I don't think this is necessarily the book's fault, but I think this book made a very good case for how relational frame theory plays into challenging behavior, or the function of challenging behavior, and then how ACT could be used as a component of behavioral treatment. But it also then left me feeling very much like, if I'm not using ACT and my clients have a complex verbal repertoire and it's not like slam dunk, it's just contingency management, baby stuff, then
that's not how that is.
No. But it's just simple contingency management, right? It's the stuff that you're definitely going to learn as a BCBA. I think the point of the book was to share how our field isn't necessarily jumping forward in terms of socially significant treatment options as we could be. And this might be why, this lack of understanding. On the other hand, it then also left me saying, I don't understand how I would use this necessarily. I still need a supervisor. How am I going to get this practice? So, book, all you've done is convince me that I need to know this, but not how to do it, not even what my next steps need to be. And I'm just going to go to work tomorrow and feel like I'm failing everyone counting on me. Now, again, that's not the book's fault. I'm fusing. I'm the one who's fusing with that thought. That's me.
I was like, yeah, there's a chapter on that, Rob. Like, let's talk about that.
But still, whether or not it's, I'm observing, self is I'm the observing self. I'm having the thought
that I'm horrible at my job because I'm not understanding everything in this book so that I can put it into practice. That's
definitely you.
That is all you, dude.
That's me.
That's totally you.
But
I did not feel that way. And I work with adults, right? Adults and young children, and everyone that I work with, right, has a vocal verbal repertoire for the most part. I didn't feel that way. So I don't think you need to feel that way. That's all you. But maybe we, instead of talk about the book and how we felt about it, let's talk about the book, right? So there's
we can do that.
We're already like a half hour in, and we only have an hour and a half left, and we have 3 parts, right?
Yeah, we'll get through it. We're not going to talk in every detail on this book. It's too big. It's too much. Right. There's too much to know.
But let's move into that.
One other general point I'd like to make, which is all the past guests that we've had on the show who practice ACT, and other folks I know who, really ascribe to this, are some of the most people who are like the most at peace with themselves, right? They seem like extremely self-actualized and really jazzed about this approach to understanding their lives and really like placing their values forward. So I have a lot of respect for this as a personal practice.
Yes.
100% personal practice. Yes. I do a lot of the things that ACT does in my personal life every day. Right. And we'll talk about that.
You do, Jackie. Yeah.
I do. I'm like your woo-woo friend. I'm your woo-woo bestie, everyone. Like, I'll give you some crystals. I'll do some meditation.
You do a good job of many of the things in this book.
Thank you.
And there is, it says say in the book, there are a lot of things that you might be like, I'm training cognitive behavior therapy. And if you still have a bent towards mindfulness, like we've talked about mindfulness in like classroom management systems before with Dr. Felber. So you certainly could be doing more ACT than you think you're doing, even though you're not necessarily labeling it as ACT. So we also don't want anyone to say, I don't understand ACT. I'll never understand it. It's impossible. Some of that is our personal journeys. But I think we all agree there's a lot to be had here. The challenge we have is, I think if you're saying, I think I know a lot about it, kind of like the way like Alan or Jackie were talking about it, or maybe I'm like, a little beyond where Rob is, you we're not going to say, don't read this book. You won't gain anything out of it. But I think if you're like ACT, I've heard of that, I want to learn more about it, I would not recommend that you start with this book.
I think
the Rule 4 book.
I think if you do start with this book, you need to take it slow. Right? So if you decide to take, because this book does have everything that you need in it, right? So if you do start, it has all of the theory, right? It has some examples of treatment.
Everything's
maybe not
big.
everything, right? But okay, you're right. Everything is a big word, but it does have a theory to treatment, right?
Considering there's sections in the book that are like, you should definitely read a book on RFT because we're not going to cover it all.
I know, but
it's too big.
But if you are going to read this book, do it slow. Like take a chapter, and then if you don't,
where we want.
So take a chapter, and then if you don't understand the chapter, that's when you do some further reading, right? So you don't this isn't like a sit down on a Sunday read, right? This is not that kind of read. And even if you were like an ACT practitioner, I still don't think it's that kind of read. The size is too small for a Sunday read.
The font's too small.
The font is too small. But I think, if you take it slow, you could learn things if you have someone to talk about it afterwards, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. There's learning. There's learning to be had here. That is, we all agree on that.
And just one brief thing for me, talking about like Rob's point about like being very intimidated about the content and in terms of what individuals are you going to be serving when you're using ACT? So that's what got me into using ACT, is having clients that that I knew would eventually probably benefit from like more traditional cognitive behavioral therapies when they're older, but they don't yet have the verbal repertoire to get there. And so like using ACT and ACT tools to teach them, to have a framework for them to be able to then access those resources as they get older and make them more meaningful to them.
Yeah.
And
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so I think it is, as Jackie, what I would say the friendly skeptic is saying, like, this is the sort of thin end of the wedge of our scope of practice. This is getting into a field that's very hard, but we as behavior analysts, especially those who do still work in intervention and treatment in like the sort of private healthcare setting where we do involve a lot of therapy, like we want to do meaningful stuff. And so rather than just sort of social skills or SEL, applying the sort of ACT framework to how we're going to proceed and how we're going to help our clients, that's why I find it valuable. So,
well, it definitely made me want to take a look at the peak curriculum, possibly to teach myself relational frames a little bit more. Because
let's go one weekend, you and me. Let's go through it.
We'll just do it. We'll just knock it out. I love it.
Let's just knock it out.
It sounds good. I feel like I'll be in a good. It's like I know what the students know. I think I'm ready to read the next book on the subject. All right, so a little, your mileage is going to vary on this book, but let's take a little break. Kind of our final, or not our final thoughts, but our initial thoughts. Let's take a little break, and when we come back, let's dive a little deeper into what acceptance and commitment therapy for behavior analysts has to offer. We'll be right back. We hope you enjoyed this little preview of our book club. Remember, the full-length discussion goes up to 2 hours. So if you want to hear a little bit more detail about the ins and outs of the book itself, you can subscribe. Remember, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Subscribe right now. It'll download right now, as well as getting you access to all of the books we've done for, this is our 3rd year of doing this, as well as discounts at the CE store and free CEs for this book club, for all of our previous book clubs, and for our listener choice episodes. We have another listener choice episode coming out not too far in the future. And again, voted on by patrons. So if you want to have a little bit more choice as to our topics, what's one way to do it? Patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Well, in any case, we hope you enjoyed the preview, and we hope to hear you. We hope to hear you. We hope to hear from you, but we certainly hope you will enjoy our next episode coming out in a couple of days. But until then, keep responding. Bye.